Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said it like she was daring me to react. "You're not entitled to touch," she whispered, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence of the room. She stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on me like she wanted to see how far she could push before I broke. For a moment, I didn't move. I just stared at her, then said calmly, "And you're not entitled to my loyalty." The words hung between us like smoke. No shouting, no anger, just finality. She blinked, stunned for a second, and then turned away. That was the last real thing we said to each other that night. The rest was just noise, her footsteps fading down the hall, the sound of her phone buzzing on the counter, the door closing. I sat there in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the half-finished dinner on the table. We'd been married for 5 years, but in that moment, it felt like we were strangers playing out a script we both hated. It wasn't about touch. It was about control. Every word she said lately had come with conditions, every silence with punishment. She'd stopped being my wife and started being my critic. Later, I went outside and sat in my truck, a Ford F-150 I'd had since before I met her. It smelled like leather and rain, like something solid in a world that had started to feel temporary. I turned on the engine, let it idle, and just listened. The hum of the motor was steadier than anything waiting inside the house. By midnight, I went back in. She was asleep, or pretending to be. Her phone glowed again on the nightstand, notifications lighting her face. I didn't need to know who was texting. I already knew. When someone starts denying affection, it's never just about distance, it's about distraction. I didn't confront her. Not that night. I just turned off the light and lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind running quiet but sharp. I realized that when she said I wasn't entitled to touch, what she really meant was I wasn't entitled to her anymore. She wanted separation without consequence. What she didn't understand was that I'd already started pulling away long before she said those words. I didn't need to fight for space. I just needed to stop giving her mine. That was the night I made the decision. No arguments, no breakdowns. Just strategy. I'd stopped chasing what didn't want to be caught. I'd stopped trying to touch what had already turned cold. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She moved around the kitchen with that same forced calm, making coffee, scrolling through her phone, and humming under her breath. That fake normalcy was worse than the fight. It told me everything. She wasn't sorry, she was comfortable. Comfortable in a version of our marriage where I kept showing up no matter how cold she became. I sat at the table, watching her reflection in the window. When she finally looked at me, she said, "You're quiet again." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. She wanted me reactive, emotional, begging to fix what she'd already broken. But I wasn't playing that part anymore. After she left for work, I stayed home. I opened my laptop and went through our shared accounts, the bank statements, credit cards, phone records. I wasn't looking for proof of betrayal. I was looking for patterns. And I found them. Lunches that didn't match her schedule, transactions in places she never mentioned. One charge at Olive Garden at 8 p.m. On a Thursday, she told me she was working late that night. It wasn't about the money. It was about the lies that cost more than anything on those receipts. That evening, she came home later than usual, her hair slightly different, her perfume stronger. She greeted me like nothing was wrong. I nodded, kept my tone even, detached. Inside, I was memorizing every detail, her posture, her tone, the way she glanced at her phone every few minutes. That's how you know the truth without hearing it. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask who he was. I just started detaching piece by piece. Stopped waiting up for her. Stopped initiating conversation. Stopped pretending that the version of us she wanted still existed. Over the next few days, I changed my habits. Started going to the gym before sunrise, having breakfast alone at the Waffle House near the highway. Same booth every time, same waitress who didn't ask questions. Routine became armor. When she noticed the shift, she said, "You're distant lately." I told her, "Just tired." She smiled, relieved, thinking I was slipping back into the same predictable man she could manage. But she was wrong. The truth is, I wasn't tired. I was planning. Quietly, deliberately. The kind of planning that doesn't end in shouting. It ends in absence. I'd already stopped giving her my loyalty. She just hadn't realized it yet. It's strange how fast distance can grow between two people living under the same roof. Within a week, the silence between us had its own gravity. We spoke, but only when necessary, short, polite exchanges that felt like transactions. She still tried to maintain the illusion of control, asking if I'd eaten, making plans without me, pretending my quiet was compliance instead of retreat. I didn't give her a reason to suspect anything. I still left for work at the same time, came home at the same hour, but everything I did was detached, calculated. While she spent her evenings locked in the bedroom with her phone, I sat on the porch, coffee in hand, staring at the empty driveway. I wasn't waiting for her anymore. I was waiting for myself to decide when enough was enough. One night, I came home later than usual. She was in the kitchen, pacing, her phone on speaker. The man's voice was faint, but I heard it. She didn't notice me at first. When she finally did, her face went pale. She hung up quickly and said, "It's just a friend." I nodded. I didn't argue. The truth didn't need my reaction. It already existed. After that, she started acting nervous, checking my face for signs of anger, asking if something was wrong. I kept my tone even, controlled. She wanted drama. I gave her calm. That calm terrified her more than shouting ever could. The next morning, I packed a small duffel bag. Nothing dramatic, just essentials. I told her I needed a few days out of town for work. She didn't question it. That's how disconnected we'd become. The woman who once needed to know where I was every minute didn't even ask which city I was heading to. I drove out before sunrise. The roads empty, headlights cutting through the fog. Somewhere between the miles, I stopped thinking about what she was doing and started focusing on what I was becoming. Freedom doesn't always start with a clean break. It starts with the first quiet decision not to look back. I checked into a small motel off the interstate, grabbed dinner at a nearby Subway, and watched the world go on without her. My phone buzzed twice that night. Both messages from her, "You okay? And when will you be home?" I didn't answer. The silence between those unanswered texts felt heavier than any goodbye. She'd built her power on my attention. Now, I was taking that back. And the best part was, she didn't even know it yet. 2 days passed before she realized I wasn't where I said I'd be. Her first text was polite, almost casual, "Hope work's going well." Then another, hours later, asking when I'd be home. I didn't reply. By the third day, the tone changed. "Are you ignoring me? What's going on?" I watched the messages stack up, one after another, until they stopped. That silence told me she was starting to panic. I stayed in that motel off the highway, watching the world move without me. There was something liberating about being unreachable. No expectations, no performance. Just me and the hum of the air conditioner, the smell of cheap coffee, and the steady realization that I'd been living as a ghost in my own marriage long before I left. On the third night, I stopped at a Walmart nearby to pick up a few things: razor, shirt, toothpaste. Small reminders that I was still a man with choices. I caught my reflection in the store window as I left. I looked different. Not happier, just clearer. When I got back, I turned my phone on for the first time in days. There were 12 missed calls, mostly from her, one from Mark. I called him back. He told me she'd been asking questions, calling my office, pretending it was about paperwork. He said she looked nervous. I thanked him and hung up. That night, she sent one more message. It wasn't angry anymore. It was desperate. "I don't know what you're doing, but please talk to me." I read it twice before setting the phone down. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who once controlled every ounce of closeness between us was now begging for attention she'd spent months rejecting. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove out to a small diner by the truck stop and sat there until sunrise. The waitress poured me coffee without asking, and I realized that quiet conversations with strangers now felt more honest than anything I'd had with my wife in years. When the sun finally rose, I made my decision. I wasn't going back, not yet. I needed her to feel what I'd felt for months. The uncertainty, the stillness, the quiet that grows louder with every unanswered question. As I got back into the car, I checked my phone one last time. No new messages. For the first time, that didn't bother me, because I knew what was coming next. She'd stop asking where I was, and start wondering who I'd become. By the end of the week, her tone changed completely. The woman who once said I wasn't entitled to touch her was now leaving voicemails that sounded nothing like the person I married. The first one started with anger. "You can't just disappear like this." The second one was quieter. I just want to know you're okay. The third one, that one was silence. Just the sound of her breathing for a few seconds before she hung up. I played them once, then deleted all three. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. When someone treats your presence like an inconvenience long enough, your absence becomes their mirror. And that reflection isn't easy to face. I stayed in that small town for a while, blending into a life that wasn't mine yet, but felt closer to peace than anything I'd known in years. Mornings at the diner, evenings walking by the gas station where truckers stopped for coffee. No noise, no expectations, just stillness. One night, Mark called again. He said she'd been showing up at places I used to go, Waffle House, the gym, even the parking lot near my old job. She looks like she's losing it, he said. You sure you're not going to talk to her? I told him no. There was nothing left to say. He sighed, said, she's finally realizing what she did. I said good. Some lessons need silence. Later that night, I checked her social media. I didn't follow her anymore, but curiosity still had its pull. Her posts were different now. No selfies, no filters, just empty captions about trust, pain, and starting over. I knew what that meant. She wasn't healing. She was trying to control the narrative before it swallowed her whole. I turned off my phone and leaned back in bed, the glow from the cheap motel lamp cutting through the dark. I thought about that moment in the kitchen, the way she'd looked at me when she said those words. She believed she'd won something that night. She believed pulling away would keep her in control. But what she didn't understand was simple. I didn't leave to hurt her. I left because I finally understood what loyalty meant. It isn't something you owe to someone who's already stopped choosing you. When I woke the next morning, I packed my bag, checked out of the motel, and started the drive home. Not to return, but to close the chapter myself. Quietly, cleanly, and on my terms. The drive back was long and quiet. I didn't play music. I didn't check my phone. The road stretched out like a line between who I'd been and who I was becoming. By the time I reached the city, the sun was setting, orange light bleeding through the clouds, washing everything in a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. When I pulled into our street, her car was there. She was home. I parked a few houses down, cut the engine, and just sat there. The house looked smaller now, like it couldn't contain what we'd been through. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even angry. I was detached. The kind of detached that comes when you've already said your goodbyes in silence. After a few minutes, I walked up the driveway. The key still fit. Inside, the air smelled like vanilla candles, her favorite from Target. The living room was spotless, too spotless. I could tell she'd cleaned in panic, the way people do when they're trying to scrub away guilt. She came out of the bedroom as soon as she heard the door. For a second, she froze, like she wasn't sure if I was real. Her voice cracked when she said, "You came back." I nodded but didn't speak. She looked different, tired, softer, almost fragile. "I didn't know if you'd ever walk through that door again," she said. I told her, "I almost didn't." She started talking fast, filling the space between us with words I didn't ask for. Apologies, explanations, denials. I didn't interrupt. I just let her talk until she ran out of breath. When she finally stopped, I said, "You don't need to explain. You made your choice. I just made mine." Her eyes filled with tears. She said, "I was angry that night. I didn't mean it." I looked at her and said, "You did. You just didn't think I'd listen." That shut her up. The room went still. She reached out to touch me, but I stepped back. That tiny movement said more than any speech could. The woman who once denied my touch now couldn't handle being denied herself. I left a small envelope on the table, my house keys, her ring, a note that just said, "We're even." Then I turned and walked out. The air outside felt clean. I didn't look back. Behind me, a door closed, and for the first time, it didn't sound like loss. It sounded like freedom. I didn't drive far that night, just enough to see the city lights fade in the rearview mirror. I stopped at a rest area off the highway, sat on the hood of my car, and watched the traffic move like a river of ghosts. Every car that passed felt like a version of me, someone running from something they should have left long ago. The air was cold, but it felt clean. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of someone else's moods pressing on me. My thoughts were quiet, simple. I wasn't replaying her words. I wasn't wondering if I'd done the right thing. I just existed, free of reaction, free of guilt. I stayed there until morning. By sunrise, my phone had already filled with new messages. You can't just leave like that. You owe me a conversation. Please, just talk to me. I didn't reply. I watched the screen light up, then fade out, like her voice was dying in real time. The woman who once spoke like she owned every part of me was now talking to silence. Later that day, I found a small apartment near the water. Nothing fancy, one bedroom, brick walls, cheap rent. But it was mine. I bought a few things from Walmart: a mattress, coffee maker, a small lamp. Starting over doesn't need luxury, it needs clarity. At night, I'd sit by the window and listen to the sound of the waves hitting the pier. The quiet became something I looked forward to. It wasn't emptiness anymore, it was peace. People talk about freedom like it's loud, like it's shouting from rooftops or burning bridges. But real freedom is quiet. It's the calm that follows when you stop trying to prove your worth to someone who never saw it. A week passed before she finally stopped calling. The last message she sent was short. "You really meant it." I read it once, then deleted it. There was no satisfaction in it, no victory, just closure. I didn't hate her. I didn't love her either. What I felt was balance, the kind that comes when you finally stop trying to fix what was never broken, just misplaced. That night, I made myself a drink, sat on the floor, and looked around the empty apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't need her to feel alive. I just needed to remember how to choose myself. A month passed before I heard her name again. It came from Mark, my oldest friend. We met for coffee at Starbucks one morning before work. He looked uneasy, the way people do when they're about to say something you won't like. He said she'd been asking around, mutual friends, co-workers, even my family. She was saying she just wanted closure. I almost laughed. Closure isn't something you ask for after you burn the bridge. It's something you live with when the fire dies. I told Mark to let her talk. The story was hers now, not mine. He nodded, then said, "She doesn't look good, man. It's like she's finally realizing what she lost." I didn't respond. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was detachment. The kind that comes when you stop being part of someone's narrative and start being your own. That night, I went for a drive along the coast. The road was quiet, the air cool, and the sound of the ocean carried through the open window. I parked near the edge of a cliff where the waves crashed against the rocks and just sat there, listening. That silence felt heavier than any conversation we'd ever had. It wasn't loneliness. It was arrival. When I got home, there was a letter in my mailbox. Handwritten. No name, but I knew the handwriting. It was hers. Inside, just one line. "You're colder than I thought you could be." I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. She still didn't understand. It wasn't coldness, it was clarity. People confuse peace for indifference when they've only ever known chaos. The next morning, I made breakfast, opened the window, and let the wind fill the apartment. The air smelled like rain and coffee. Simple, clean. I looked at the phone on the table and realized I hadn't checked it in 2 days. That kind of stillness would have terrified me once. Now it felt like control. By the weekend, her messages stopped completely. No calls, no letters, nothing. And that silence didn't feel like absence anymore. It felt like balance. The storm she started had finally burned itself out. I walked down to the pier that evening, the same one I'd watched from my window for weeks. The sky was dark, the water restless, but I wasn't. She'd tried to make me believe that walking away was weakness. She was wrong. Walking away wasn't losing her. It was finding myself again. It was late November when I saw her again. I was grabbing groceries at Target, standing in line with a basket full of small things that now made up my quiet life: coffee, bread, detergent. When I turned, she was there, 2 registers over. She looked thinner, pale, tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Our eyes met for a second. She froze, then smiled, unsure, like she wasn't sure what version of me she'd get. For a moment, the air between us tightened. The last time we'd spoken, her voice had been full of power. Now it carried something else: regret, maybe, or the realization that I'd moved past needing her. She walked over, slow, cautious, holding a box of cereal like she needed a reason to stand there. She said, "You look different." I told her, "So do you." She asked how I'd been. I said, "Better." Then she laughed softly, that nervous laugh people give when they know they've lost control of the story. She said she'd been trying to figure things out, that she'd made mistakes, that she thought maybe we could talk. I didn't interrupt. I just let her talk until the silence caught up. When she finally stopped, I said, "You told me I wasn't entitled to touch you. I listened, but you weren't entitled to my loyalty either. And now you're not entitled to my time." Her eyes glossed over. She tried to smile again, but it fell apart halfway. She said, "You really changed." I told her no. I just stopped being small. The cashier called her next, breaking the moment. She looked at me one last time before walking away, her head low, shoulders heavy. Watching her leave didn't hurt. It didn't heal either. It just confirmed something I'd known for a while. The distance between who we were and who we'd become couldn't be closed anymore. When I walked out of the store, the cold hit my face. The air felt cleaner, sharper. I loaded the bags into the car, started the engine, and just sat there for a minute. I wasn't thinking about her anymore. I was thinking about how quiet the world felt, and how that quiet no longer scared me. By the time I pulled out of the parking lot, she was gone. But for the first time since that night in the kitchen, so was the weight she'd left behind. A few weeks passed after that brief encounter at Target. December rolled in quietly, the kind of cold that carries more memory than weather. I spent most evenings at home, cooking simple meals, letting music fill the empty corners. The silence didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt deserved. I'd stopped expecting the past to explain itself. Some stories don't need an ending. They just need distance. One Friday night, I got a call from Mark. He said she'd moved out of the city, left her job, sold the house, and vanished without saying where she was headed. He said it like it was news that should matter. I told him, "She's just following the silence I left her in." He didn't argue. He just said, "You really let it go, didn't you?" I said, "I didn't let it go. I just stopped carrying it." That night, I took a long drive. No destination, just movement. I stopped by the Waffle House off the interstate, the same one where I used to sit during the worst days of our marriage. The waitress recognized me. She smiled and said, "Been a while." I told her, "Yeah, it's been a while." The coffee tasted the same, but I didn't. As I sat there, I thought about that first night, the one where she stood in the doorway and told me I wasn't entitled to touch her. I remembered how calm my voice sounded when I said she wasn't entitled to my loyalty. Back then, it felt like the end of something. Now I understood it was the beginning. The moment I stopped trying to win someone who saw love as leverage. When I left the diner, the air outside was freezing, the sky clear. I looked up and thought about how small everything feels once you step outside the story that used to define you. Back home, I poured myself a drink, stood by the window, and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about her, not with anger or nostalgia, but with the kind of calm that comes when you've made peace with what can't be fixed. If she ever found this version of me again, she wouldn't recognize him. Not because I'd changed too much, but because I'd stopped existing in a world where love had to be earned through pain. I turned off the lights, let the quiet take over, and smiled to myself. Some people chase closure. I learned to live in silence and make it my freedom. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.